Hi everyone, and welcome to this feature set demonstration of version 4.6 of SIEMonster. In this session I will take you briefly through the entire environment with each component and demonstrate or explain what the component does or what its intended purpose is. Please note that for this presentation the event monitor has been included in my demo environment, but this is not available in the community edition at present. Other than that, all the components are available in the Community Edition free of charge. Right, let's get started. Everybody that is viewing this video should at least have some view or historical knowledge of what a SIEM is. But for those that don't, I'll give a quick brief overview. Basically, a SIEM is a tool to ingest incident and events from your environment to analyze for security or system issues, and it will allow you to create visualizations and alerts based on those events and incidents that come through, so that you can perform alerting or remedial action should it be necessary. Right, let's get started. As you can see, the tiles that are available in the environment are all listed here with alerts, dashboard, event monitor, analyzers, threat modeling, incident response, etc. Each one of these tiles consists of one or more components and the underlying architecture. In the Community Edition, this is based off of Docker with a whole bunch of containers that are configured to connect to each other, and on the Professional and Enterprise editions that are hosted in the cloud, the underlying architecture is Kubernetes based. The Pro edition, however, is available in a Dockerized version for local use on premises. Data ingestion is supported into the correlation engine via agent or syslog, and the data is then passed through decoders, which breaks it down into key value pair data sets. So I'll quickly show you how that looks. The agents that can be installed is Wazoo. Wazoo comes pre-configured inside the environment. It will take the data, it will break it down into its key pieces, and then it will pull it through the correlation engine, where there's a collection of rules that it's vetted against, in which it is assigned a rule level, a rule description based on matching criteria. So we'll quickly look at security events. You can see that it has already classified the rule levels here. The Wazoo rule levels run from 0 to 15. Everything below 3 is discarded as system noise. 3 and upwards are stored. Obviously, the higher it goes, the more attention should be given to the alerts. 15 being the highest, which means that it's almost guaranteed that some bad actions are taking place and needs urgent attention. Whereas 3 could be supporting information around other events of a higher rule level, etc. The key value pair structure is very logical in its approach. You can have a look and you can see that it breaks it down as the naming goes. It's a key value pair, so there's a key and then there's a corresponding value to it. In this case, it's an application that was started and it was detected by an additional SysMon rule set that I'm running on this specific workstation. You can also see the rule level is level 3. Wazoo has many components that it utilizes. It also provides file integrity monitoring. By default, that would cover folders on Windows like C, Windows System 32 and such, but it also does the registry for Windows. On Linux and on Mac, it will do various folders like user/bin, etc. And additional folders can be configured for ingestion as well, as you can see here. If you want to look at the raw events, you can have a look as well, and it will show you in this case that changes to registry keys have been observed and the rule level is level 7. There is also policy monitoring, system auditing, and security configuration assessment to assist with configuring or reconfiguring your workstations for optimal ingestion. So we'll pick the same one, and this will give you a rating. You can see that there are 21 categories that passed and 11 that failed and 39 that's not applicable, with a total score of 65. If you go into this, it will give you a breakdown of each one of the items that it checks. You can click on pass, fail, not applicable, etc., and it will filter those automatically for you. Here you can see the ones that needs addressing. So in this case, they are mostly settings that needs to be applied to the registry. Vulnerabilities checking can also be enabled. Please note that this does a package compare, so it will get from upstream vendors package listings and versions that you should be on, including CVEs, etc., that's associated with specific package versions. It will then proceed to check your package versions against that, and it will list any issues with that. Something important to note for operating systems such as Red Hat and CentOS that do backporting of patches, you may get false positives with that because they provide the fixes to the same package version, so those will require manual evaluation, etc. There's also the default regulatory compliance tabs here, like PCI, NIST 800-53, the TSC standards, which is based off the old rainbow colored books from the Security Historical Archives. Some of you may have heard of them and some of you may not have. The GDPR for general data protection in the EU and the UK, and then HIPAA for the US. You will note that the data displays have changed slightly. In the older version, the controls were listed at the top in a scroll bar that you could move. They are no longer here. They've been moved to a new section here. You can see that the control numbers are listed there as well as there, and the dashboard provides you with a clear view of areas that need attention. If you click on controls, it will list them all. You can filter for the ones that have been triggered and which ones haven't. And it will give you the numbers for each of the ones that are pertinent. If you hover over them, it will give you a pop-up with the description of the specific control, and you can review it there. If you want to see only that control in the dashboard, you can click on this icon here. It will take you back to the dashboard and it will automatically filter it for that requirement. If you want to look at the raw events, same process. You can click on the icon. It will take you to the events panel, and it will only show you that item that is filtered. Just to show you what that looks like, you can see it's added a filter for rule PCI DSS 11.2.1. It has a lot of additional items that can be configured and set up to serve the purposes for your specific environment, including clustering, CDB list, custom decoders, custom rules, etc. A further deep dive into Wazoo will be performed at a later stage. Once Wazoo has finished with its ingestion and correlation of events, it is picked up by the flow processors, and the flow processors would then take it through its entire process before writing it to Elasticsearch. The benefit for using Kafka and NiFi is that if any errors occurs on any of the processes, which are the large blocks, it will actually give you a error warning on the top right hand corner, and you can hover over that and you can see the full message. There's no need to go through thousands of lines of logs again to find a specific error. You can purely watch it from here, from this console. In this case, this is a generated error specific for demonstration purposes. The way it works is each processor performs a specific function. It then goes into a queue, which is the small blocks between all of these. And once it finishes running through all the processors, it eventually writes out to Elasticsearch. There are failure categories that allows for data to be excluded from the queue so that it doesn't hold up valid data, and these are the log attributes ones. So, for example, if the JOL transform that modifies the JSON data structure for geo-enrichment fails, it will write it to log attributes so that you don't write failed data to Elasticsearch, thereby keeping your Elasticsearch clear. There are various items here, as you can see. Suricata is the other one for the Pro and the Community Edition. That's quite pertinent because it's pre-built into the environment. For the Enterprise and MSSP editions, the Suricata is on the Hydro appliance, so that would be separate. It would still feed through the same flows, but it is only deployed once you deploy the Hydra on premises for log collection, etc. Once the items are written to Elasticsearch, you can either access them through the Wazoo dashboard that I showed earlier, or you can go into Discover. Make sure to go to a index pattern that contains data, and you can then review the raw data as it comes through. So in a case like this, it will give you whatever logs you're ingesting, it will give you the breakdown of those. And in this case, we can see that the rule description is it's a MITRE event that was detected. And in this case, it was masquerading or defense, evasion, and execution. And if we look at the full data from system message in this case, it'll show you that it was a process create. It tells you which process created that. In this case, it's Teams. So this is essentially a safe process. It's just a very noisy rule that I set up for demonstration purposes. And it will give you all the relevant information that you need. SIEMon is an optional additional item that you can configure to write outputs, and it requires that Wazoo be provided with an additional config string to pick up that specific event channel from Windows. With that, you can also create your own custom dashboards. There are a couple of examples included. Again, if you have empty indexes, you will see errors like that. And this is just an example of what you can perform on the environment. There's a whole bunch of different visualizations you can create depending on your information that you have or your log types that you're ingesting, etc. In this case, it's the all MITRE ATT&CK dashboard that we've built just with the MITRE ATT&CK framework inside. And you can see that it's got the cloud-based in visualization. Obviously, the bigger the item, the more events there are associated with it. So and this is all interactive. So say for example, you want to see everything that's associated with loaded DLLs, you can click on that and you can see it immediately updates it at top left hand side as a filter. And then you can scroll down and you can look at the items that are applicable to this. There are a couple of different ways that you can show, like for example, there's a DNS dashboard that you can build from your Suricata data that will give you your lookups. It will show you the areas where you are busy performing the lookups for, the source IP addresses, etc., or the destinations and so on, and then where the destinations are that you're going to. You can even map those out to geographic areas and even break it down to that. It all depends on the various fields that's available inside your items. There's also anomaly detection that you can build in. So this comes by default with the system. You can create your own detectors. You basically give it a description. You specify the data source, which would usually be a wildcard, and we recommend the Wazoo alerts one. And you specify the timestamp, and then you can start adding filters to it to run analysis on that. This contains too much information to cover in this session and will be covered in more in-depth informational sessions at a later stage. There's also index management, where you can set up policies for managing your replicas, moving them between hot and cold storage, archiving them, etc. S3 bucket backup is also supported and allows for archiving via automation. Once your data is ingested, it's gone through its first layer of correlation, it's got its alerting, and it's got its rule levels and its descriptions, etc. The next step is to go to the SIEMonster alerting section. You can see that in this case there are quite a few demonstration versions. The ones that's included with the default build are Suricata Alert Severity 1, 2, and 3, Event Channel critical, major, and minor, as well as straight up alerts V2 critical, major, and minor. You will see that significant changes have been made or improvements have been added to the SIEMonster alerting module. This was based off of customer requests, suggestions, recommendations from the forums, etc. And we've made it significantly more user-friendly. So if we go in here, the event monitors dashboard tile that you saw earlier can be configured via the Alerter integration. You can add any fields you want, either as static text, or you can do lookups via the percentage mark. So say for example you want to include agent name, but you want to include static text as well. You can just do something like that, and that will automatically extract the data. It will format the query for you. It will automatically extract the data and write it to the destination, which in this case is Alerter. You can also add tags. Again, you can add static information to the front and extracted variables to the end, or you can just do extracted variables or just do static text. We've also simplified the Hive integration greatly. Again, you can use the percentage sign to bring up a drop-down list for integrating all the queries that you need for the values that you want to represent. And we've also brought the observables in. So it has a drop-down list which it retrieves from our incident response automatically. You can pick whichever one it is that's corresponding to the field that you want to extract. So I'll take IP in this case. And in this case, you wouldn't add static text to the front of it because this is an observable field that will be directly analyzed by the incident response side. So we can do agent.ip, for example. And that will automatically push the agent IP through as an observable inside the incident response. This is better with external IPs, not internal IPs. But in certain cases, if you're using our vulnerability management side and our asset inventory side of things, you may want to include your internal IPs as well, so that you can reference the attacks or events that you're picking up. So this will be covered a little bit later in this session, but this may be useful to include as well. But that is purely up to your preferences. Tags are always important when dealing with incident response. Tags gives you additional mechanisms and means to filter the events for the internal dashboards inside incident response, as well as when filtering and grouping large numbers of events that you want to deal with as one case. So if you have an agent IP, for example, and you know that the last 10,000 alerts that went through were specific to one IP, you can then, in the incident response, click on that IP. It will filter all the alerts coming in for that specific IP address, and you can actually pull those into one case, which we'll cover a little bit later. It is generally recommended that you include tags for all the fields that do not extend beyond a few words. So rule description is fine. Rule descriptions are generally one very short sentence, but if you have fields that span like 3 or 4 lines, it's generally not recommended, and I'll give you a demonstration as to why that could be problematic. Fields that are unique for the same alert, so if you have ICMP block denies, etc., that comes in and it triggers a correlation rule, it has a fired times counter, and something like that, it's a unique alert every time, but that specific rule ID would have been triggered numerous times. So every time that triggers, it generates an alert, it goes through, and it adds a tag for the fire times that increases. So obviously, if you have an alert that has gone through 10,000 times, you could have 10,000 tags that said fire times with a different value. That's just something to bear in mind. It's better to have static fields in here per event type, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit. Once you've set this all up, you can obviously test run it. You can send real alerts as long as it's not aggregations. These will send real alerts through to whichever destinations have been configured here. there you can see that we've also expanded the list of output locations or destinations. So it depends on what your needs are, but you can use any or all of them. When you save the rule, there has now been added a text box. This is to add a description for the changes that you've made. The reason for this is we've built in a versioning system at the back end, which works the same as Git. And I'll give you an example now. Modified variables, and I'll save it. Once it is done, it will refresh the page, and if you go to history, you will see the whole history of the alerts that you've had. So if I click on the eye, it will show me the differences in configuration between the current version and the previous version. If I want to compare it between multiple versions or an earlier version, I can click the center block, which will then show me the differences between those as well. And if at any point I say, okay, I'm done with my testing, my changes haven't worked, I can just click the restore button. I can say bad configuration recovery or whatever I choose, and it will recommit it and add it to the top. And if we go there, it'll show what the changes are. So I have set up alerter inside my alerts. What they look like when you receive them is, depending on the severity that you've set, it will color code various ones. So this is a dashboard to see what kind of events are flowing through the system. You will see that obviously there's critical, major, and minor. It depends on what criteria you want to set. You can adjust this completely based on your needs. These ones gives you additional information. If you click on it, you can see that there's a lot of information here, and then there's the generalized message that came through from the alert. We can look at the data that's inside. In this case, I have extracted the payload printable as well, and you can also look at the history for this alert. Then the options are watch, so that it gives you updates for it. You can acknowledge it. You can shelve it, which will take it, it's sort of like a snooze button on an alarm. And you can close it, or you can delete it, or you can just copy the information. There are various customization options available. On the MSSP edition, you would, for example, configure the resource as the tenant name so that you can view the alerts dashboard for all your tenants in the MSSP edition. That is quite useful in having a global view for everything, even though the incident response is split between tenants. This will give you that visibility so that you don't have to flip through tenants the entire time. The other side of it is the incident response. Incident response is tied in with Cortex and with MISP, which makes it sort of like a trifecta of tools, because the incident response hive, in this case, will do lookups for your open source intelligence through Cortex and inside MISP. Cortex ties everything together with all the analyzers, and MISP provides some of the open source intelligence. So if we go down this list, this is what it looks like when, for example, source ports will always change because it assigns an available port when the communication is established. Fire time, source port, etc. So even though it's one type of item detected, there are variables that change with each one, and it will keep each tag of those. Now, you may not mind this. Certain individuals may find this too noisy. You can customize this to your specific needs. You can see that the order tracking is also fully functional on the right hand side. If we go into this, you can see that this case is a grouping of 75 alerts. If you click on the alerts, it will give you a listing for them as well. You can preview what was in them, and you can go to the observables, and you can see which ones have been analyzed already and which ones haven't. In this case, this one hasn't. You can click run all. This is usually a good time to get up and make yourself a cup of coffee while it does the heavy lifting for you, and then you can come back when it's done and you can review the information at the top. It will add tags for each analyzer that is run, and it will provide you with details at the bottom. So we can see multiverse is done. We can click on that, and it will show us the sources where it came from: emerging threats, blocklist.net.ua, etc. It will tell you the first scene and the last scene date and time. This is so that you can validate that it's not necessarily an old address that's being flagged, because some addresses are never cleared of blacklists, etc. And it could be valid traffic that you're seeing. So it's important to see how it has been seen, how many times or how recently it's been seen and processed, etc. You can see the MISP is also finished. We can go in, and there it shows you all the feeds that MISP has picked it up in. So you can be pretty sure that this is a bad actor, and that IP needs to be supplied to your firewall admin for black holing. You can also assign TTPs based on the events that you've gotten. So for example, you can say that it was reconnaissance. You can filter it for additional items. So you can say it was that, and then that's done. And then you can build your whole attack process based off the MITRE ATT&CK framework into the solution. Once you're done with your cases, you can close them. You can send blacklists to the firewall admins. You can send new configuration suggestions for registry or whatever it is that you've detected and found out with your case to the relevant teams to make adjustments to the environment. You can build custom dashboards with case statistics, with alert statistics, etc. And this is where the tags become quite important. Tags will allow you to create additional filters and visualizations here. And that's why you add as many as possible with unique non-changing criteria. The unique IP addresses is perfectly fine, but the source ports, for example, could be a problem here unless you are going to filter specifically on source ports or create a dashboard if you want to do perhaps pattern recognition or something like that. The organizations and the users can be configured directly from here. Something to bear in mind is if you have large volumes of alerts that you're processing in cases on a smaller system, you may want to, every now and again, if there are issues with too many events, etc., just do a reindex. So you can go to platform status and you can click reindex. That's just a quick tip on the side. Once you have your incident response done, etc., you may think that that's done, the system has done what it would. That's not necessarily the case. So we also have threat modeling built in, which allows you to capture your own details from the cases that you've completed, but it also allows you to look up other items. So for example, you can look at intrusion sets. If you click on them, it'll give you background information. If there's reports, etc., linked to it, you can look them up. You can also use this to build your risk register. If you're worried, say for example, you have a lot of Linux hosts that people log into and you're worried about bash RC abuse, you can search for that, and it will bring up anything that's related to that, and you can look at it, and also it links to the reports, etc. So this is a useful tool, especially if you're new to risk registers, etc., or if you want a one-stop shop to do lookups for real life attacks, etc., then you can use this. It won't have everything in the world in it, but it will give you more than sufficient information to start building your risk register, and it will show you how to link items together, like attack patterns, attack groups, etc. Metrics will provide you with metrics for the environment, like it did with our previous versions, etc. No big changes have occurred here. You can monitor your open active primary shards, your disk usage, your CPU usage, your memory, etc. For the community edition and the local versions like Pro, you can run the additional dashboards like the node exporter, etc., which will give you a little bit more granular information. You would have also noticed that there are green dots on all the tiles. These are visual indicators for the general health of each component. So These have three color states. It's green, yellow, and red. Green means it's ready for action, it is queryable, it is responding. Yellow can mean anything from a various bunch of checks that's being done at the back end. If you hover over them, it will give you a pop-up that will show you what the current status is. So if you get something that's yellow, just hover over it and see it. Maybe you're running low on RAM, running low on disk, etc. It's something easy to resolve. You'll see there's another one right at the top in the right hand corner. That is for your general web interface health, and that one will show you if your Nginx server on the solution is running well. Then audit discovery. If you have OpenVAS, Nessus or similar, etc., you can ingest that data in here as well. This will help you with your validation of your patch management, etc., for your compliance. And as stated earlier in the alerts, you can integrate this with the incident response, so you can do a lookup against this for an internal IP. Where this is useful is if you want to validate if an attack is valid against a specific destination, like for example SSH brute force against a Windows 98 machine, if you still have those, or even a Windows 10 machine not running SSH, then you can see that it's probably some kind of automated attack and you need to blacklist the IP, but it has a lower priority. Where it would have a higher priority is if you, for example, see that one of your web servers is getting remote file inclusion attacks, or somebody's trying to perform shell shock, etc. So it's an attack that matches the platform that is being attacked. Then you can give it a higher priority when you do the analysis, and this will help you with that aspect of it. Flow processors I've already shown you. Threat intelligence is our MIS platform that we've built in here. There's a whole bunch of feeds that you can subscribe to for free. They contain various pieces of information that you can use to enrich, and the events as they come through look like this. So here you can see they've also vetted the actual results. You can see there's no false positives in there, but there's also only 94 items in there. You can also use these as general blacklists for your environment. You can give them to the firewall teams. You can give them to the systems administrators if you're running locally activated firewalls on your Linux or Windows hosts, etc. And data that comes through are provided as a type of observable. So here you can see the values listed. So these are considered bad actors or bad actor IPs. But there are other events as well, so you can see that there are telnet login feeds, for example, which means these are most likely remnants of the Mirai botnet that's still active or similar, and they are trying to perform telnet interaction with machines based on the internet, for example. So if you have a telnet server that is exposed, you can deny traffic from these to that server, just to prevent, number one, that the service might not fall over from constant attacks or similar. There's a whole bunch of different things in here. You've got user agents details, you've got IP addresses, source and destination, you've got file hashes, MD5, SHA-256, SHA-1 sums. There's a whole bunch of information that you can use for enrichment in your incident response. Obviously this ties in with your analyzers. So the analyzers also have a large number of items built into them, and you can activate any of the ones you like. So if we go to this list, I've activated the free or open source community ones, but say for example you are an avid user of Shodan, you can just enable the Shodan ones, click enable, drop in the API key and click true. Set your rate limit based on the contract that you've signed and click save. The next time you're in incident response and you're analyzing an observable that is supported by the specific analyzer, it will automatically make itself available to that observable. So there's no additional configuration required to list these. Other examples that people tend to prefer is VirusTotal, for example. There are a significant number of analyzers that can be used. Some free, some require additional services to be spun up, like Cuckoo Sandbox. and others are subscription based. The ones you use is completely up to you. This is all Python based. The source code is available. If you have additional systems inside your environment that you would like to query, etc., we can make all of that information available to you. Reporting, the interface still looks the same, but you can do at the reports history and it will give you a listing of your successful and failed reports. To schedule a report is very straightforward. You just basically click on it and you give it a name. So in this case, we'll just call it example. You choose if it's a dashboard or a saved search for Elastic. The differences are the dashboards are graphical in nature and the saved searches are text-based, so the outputs allow for differences. For dashboards, your outputs are PDF or PNG, and for saved searches, your outputs are PDF, CSV, and Excel. And you've got your paper sizes, you've got your time filters, and then of course who needs to receive this email. You can give it variables as subjects, or you can do it statically, etc. And then you can set the schedule, and once you're done you click save and it's done. It will send out the mails based on your preferred schedule as well as your preferred data source on that schedule. Straightforward as that. And then last but not least is the SOAR module for the orchestration, etc. We've done quite a bit of improvements here, added additional applications from the community in, which will allow you to integrate your solutions, and you can also add your own. So if you have your own API servers, etc., you can click create from scratch. That's a default logo, the name, the description, your base URL, your authentication type, and your actions. So you can add as many actions as you want, and they can contain any of these as well as individual items that you specify here. Once you're done, you just click save and your app is ready. Then what you do is you go to your workflows, you create a new workflow, and you can basically drag whatever it is that you need on here and do the actions that you need to do. So in this case, we'll probably have to have multiples. You can make this as complex or as simple as you want. And in the case of the Hive, it's got various options, and you can sequence them in a specific structure to orchestrate your requirements for your workflows internally. And you then simply connect them to each other based on the pre-existing criteria, or the actions that are taken. And this all works with HTTP queries, APIs, etc. So it's pure JSON output information. So if you have some HTTP or web development background, this should come as an easy tool to use. There's also triggers that you can use. So there's scheduler, there's user input, there's shuffle workflow. So if you have multiple workflows, you can actually create separate steps as part of your complete workflow. So you can create individual workflows that perform specific actions, and then you can tie them together as inputs. And you can then have them perform whatever activities they need to do. There's also the webhook, which is self-explanatory, and you can also declare variables for your flows and so on. All the documentation for this is included inside the build, so you don't need external documentation. There are also exercises under the getting started, etc. That'll take you through the process of setting this up. That concludes the session for the feature review. A lot of the improvements have been transparently performed on the back end from performance-wise. The greatest improvements from a visual aspect and a user interaction aspect is the alerting section, which no longer requires command line access to make different changes to the YAML file to have your data submitted to the incident response, like for example your observables, etc. The system can be downloaded from our website. It has been available for a little while. And if you have any questions on the Community Edition, feel free to drop questions in the Community Edition, And also, if you have the professional, enterprise, etc., feel free to log a ticket if you have questions, or just drop us an email. I hope everybody enjoyed this session, and I encourage you to download the Community Edition and try it out for yourself. It works well. This is a Community Edition. I'm demonstrating this from a workstation, so it can and is able to run from workstation-based hardware. It is safer on a RAID-based system because the backup battery module on the RAID card, etc., but it is capable of running on a workstation for testing purposes. Enjoy the system, play with it, have fun, and if you have customizations that you've applied that are cool, share it with the community. That is what it's about. Thanks, everyone.